For a long time now, I've been trying to cultivate a deeper appreciation for the yin and yang of things. And listening to the music this morning for joys and concerns, and the order of that contrasted against the confusion of snowflakes, which if you watch when you're near a building or an eave, how the snow goes in all different directions. Anyway, it just has nothing to do with the message. The message, as the title suggests, has much to do with suffering. And so with that in mind, I thought it's appropriate to begin by this announcement. This message is going to take 6 hours, and there is no intermission. Suffering is part of life. If you've ever been a son or a daughter or a mother or a father, you have known suffering. As you come to know the world, you come to know its suffering and suffer because of that understanding. The Buddha's first post-enlightenment teaching presented the Four Noble Truths. And for the rest of his life, the Buddha said that all of his teachings were discourses on that central theme. The first noble truth the Buddha presented is dukkha, which is usually translated as suffering. Many people balk at this translation of suffering because they feel it is blunt and depressing. If that was the whole of the Buddha's teachings, most of us would probably agree. But the Buddha was not presenting one noble truth. He's presenting four. The next three, the second truth is samudaya, the origin of suffering. The third truth is nirhoda, the cessation of suffering. And the fourth is marga, which is the path that ends suffering. The details of marga are presented in the Noble Eightfold Path. In the heart of the Buddha's teachings, Thich Nhat Hanh says this of the Four Noble Truths. When we recognize and acknowledge our own suffering, the Buddha, which means the Buddha within us, will look at it, discover what has brought it about, and prescribe a course of action that can transform it into peace, joy, and liberation. The prescribed transformative course of action, which Thich Nhat Hanh refers to, is the Noble Eightfold Path, which instructs us in the practice of right view, right thinking, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right diligence, right mindfulness, and right concentration. If a person focuses on any one of these practices, that person is on the path. Discussion of the Noble Eightfold Path makes up the great bulk of Buddhist teachings. Clearly, life is loaded with suffering. Some suffering, such as the pain that comes with the realization that the donuts were eaten before you arrived, is hardly worth mentioning, although many of us still choose to mention it. Other sufferings may be so intense that neither words nor actions can convey their pain. Most suffering is temporary. Physical pain such as toothaches, fevers, flu, which I just recently did, and wounds usually leave us with only memories. And most often those memories do not renew our suffering. Have you ever noticed that that we can recall the idea of pain, but we can't recall the pain itself? Mental suffering can also fade. The pain of one of my unrequited loves, which at the time seemed unbearable and incurable, has now healed. I can point to it like a scar scratched onto my leg and say smilingly, "This is how it was," and laugh at those who are laughing at me and my archetypal tale and rite of passage. Some suffering, whether it is physical or what we might call suffering of the mind, can last for such a long time that it becomes part of our daily life. As we age, the likelihood of living with physical pain, like arthritis, increases. Even if we come to accept the pain as an old friend, it still hurts. My recently mended broken back that troubled me for years was in that category. I would wake in the morning and ask, "You still there?" Even though I already knew what the answer was. And although we would start the day on pretty good terms, by the time the weeding was done, I would be in pain. A suffering in the mind, like the kind caused by a loss or a moment's action we cannot take back, or a missed opportunity, can create a suffering that lasts for a lifetime. Both my mother and father are dead. Usually when I think of them, I smile. They were good people, and I have lovely memories of our time together. However, sometimes I hurt because I miss doing things with them. It saddened me to know that I will never walk the freshly plowed fields of Cherry Hill with them looking for Indian artifacts like we did so often in the 1960s. I miss my mom's cooking, and I miss doing auto body work with my father. I miss playing Scrabble with them. Actually, I miss playing Scrabble with anyone now that all combinations of letters can be found as words because of computers. How about this one? M-O-O-I, a South African word that means pleasing or nice. Not so pleasing or nice when my daughter-in-law plays it to increase her already insurmountable lead. And talk about suffering. I have a painful memory of a time when a hurtful comment burst out of me that I could not take back. It happened years ago during a choir practice at the Lion Center before I was a member of this congregation. Kathy Benner, one of our choir members, reacted to my comment with, "Well, there goes all sense of appropriateness out the window." She smiled as she said it, but her disapproval had been clearly expressed. Comments like that were not to pass unnoticed. She was absolutely correct in making me aware of the hurtful nature of my comment. Before the service began, I went out to the parking lot to try and collect myself. I was in a deep state of suffering. I do not know if Kathy came out specifically to find me, but find me she did. And with the same kind of covenantal love in which she pointed out the inappropriate comment, she helped me to put my suffering in perspective. I remember her laughing, and she said something like, "Get a grip, son. Do you think you're the only person to have ever said a wrong thing?" It was obvious that she could relate to my suffering and therefore help me grow past it. Although this is still a painful memory, it now brings me more joy than suffering. Kathy's expressed understanding and love became a key part in my decision to join UUCSJS. I knew that this was a community where I could learn about suffering, compassion, and support. I think it is likely that all of us carry pain associated with a missed opportunity. Yep, I could have been richer and, of course, happier if only I had done such and such. And how about the time it was second and goal with the game on the line and my pass was picked off in the end zone? If only I had made the right choice, I would not be suffering right now. As bluesman Otis Rush sings, "If only I had the chance, I'd never ever make the same mistake again." Another blues song has the line, "In my younger days, if I knew then what I know now." Sometimes I find myself thinking this way, and I find it hard to stop. My brain keeps looping, what if? What if? There's no limit to the amount of joy, wealth, and fame we have missed out on, is there? The Buddha's second noble truth, Samadheya, says that we need to do more than simply recognize that suffering exists. We need to look deeply at its origins and causes. Imagine walking along a path. As you walk, you're disturbed by the fact that your foot hurts. You could leave it at that and continue walking. Or you might ask, what is the cause of my pain? And in doing so, you might realize that it is time to take the stone out of your shoe. Our reluctance to ask, why am I suffering, is reinforced by cultural norms. And to an extent, it makes sense to avoid looking at the causes of suffering in order to streamline our social interactions. There are times when it's all right to say, hang in there, or everything is going to be all right. Unfortunately, this kind of superficiality can teach us that the best way to deal with suffering is to ignore it. Here's an example dialogue. My best friend died last week. I'm sorry to hear that. You must be feeling sad. Let me know if there's anything I can do. Thanks. I'm okay. I appreciate your offer. Part of what we learn as this scenario in its various forms is repeated is that we should not look deeply into our pain. As previously noted, a simple expression of sympathy is often the most appropriate social response. However, the suffering associated with death needs to be studied. If skimming the surface is as far as we go, we may feel the pain of our loss more intensely and for a longer period of time than if we come to recognize the true nature of our hurt. If we do not look deeply into this sorrow, we may be more likely to hold on to it and think that what we are feeling is unique. Even when I realize the wound is too fresh to have begun healing, it saddens me when I read in a newspaper a mother's statement that because of the death of her son, her life will never be the same. I don't mean to be disrespectful, but I think when it comes to suffering, we could say that at the end of every day. There's a famous parable in Buddhist tradition called the mustard seed. In the story, a mother cannot accept the death of her only child. Her search for a way to bring her child back to life takes her to the Buddha. The Buddha says that he can bring her child back to life if she brings him a mustard seed or mustard seeds that from households that have never experienced death. Although all of her neighbors are willing to help by giving her mustard seeds, they cannot do so because all of their households have been touched by death. By the end of her all-day search, she hasn't acquired a single seed. She comes to realize the universality of death. She is then able to bury her child and begin her healing. If we cannot look deeply into such a universal truth as death, we might not be able to inspect other causes of suffering in our lives. We may end up developing the habit of cultivating our ignorance. If we do not understand the roots of suffering, how can we hope to bring about an end to them? In Chinua Achebe's novel Things Fall Apart, the protagonist, Okonkwo, is one of the most powerful leaders in his village. He is physically imposing, fierce, and ambitious. During a funeral celebration, he accidentally kills a member of his village when his rusty old gun explodes. He is banished from his homeland for 7 years, not because the people want to punish him, but because his presence is an abomination to the gods. He's killed one of his tribe members. His friends lovingly help him to pack up his stuff and then burn his compound. They have to purify the land. He goes to the village of his motherland. Because he does not look deeply into his suffering, Okonkwo feels sorry for himself and mopes around and is miserable. Eventually, his uncle, Uchendu, challenges him. He says, "You think you are the greatest sufferer in the world? Do you not know that men are sometimes banished for life?" He cites poignant examples of suffering in his own life, such as burying children. And at the end of his talk, he says, "Have you not heard the song they sing when a woman dies? For whom is it well? For whom is it well? For no one is it well." When we look deeply into our suffering, we can see that we play a role in creating it. In Okonkwo's case, he amplified his misfortune by not looking at its causes. Because he did not look inward, he could not see the role he played in creating his suffering. He did not look deeply into his role how his role as a leader made him feel superior, which in turn made him intolerant to any sign of weakness in others or himself. He did not look deeply into the nature of his ambition and how it created in him a consuming impatience to return to his village to renew his quest to become the most important leader of his people. Because he did not look deeply, he saw himself as a victim and suffered in that illusion. Reb Saunders, in Chaim Potek's novel The Chosen, is a Tzaddik. A Tzaddik is a leader in the Hasidic Jewish tradition who inherits his position. As a religious leader, the Tzaddik takes on the suffering of his people and therefore must have an understanding of its origins and causes. Reb Saunders says that his father taught him, quote, "One learns of the pain of others by suffering one's own pain. It is important to know pain. It destroys our self-pride, our arrogance, and our indifference to others." End quote. Reb Saunders tells the story of raising his brilliant son. He said that his son once laughed and said, "That man is an ignoramus, father." Reb Saunders was angry at this, and he said, "Look into his soul. Stand inside his soul and see the world through his eyes. You will know the pain he feels because of his ignorance, and you will not laugh." Later he states, "Better I should have no son at all than to have a brilliant son who had no soul." Think of the pain in that statement. Better I should have no son. Reb Saunders looked deeply into his pain so that he could carry the pain of others. Those who know the novel will remember that Saunders is a fierce leader who struggles relentlessly for his people's interests. Some of his actions seem harsh to some readers. I think one of the things Potek wants us to do is to enter Reb Saunders' soul so that we can understand his suffering and therefore understand his actions. Whether or not we want to believe that we are the cause of all of our suffering is not important. However, it is important to look deeply into our lives and to try and understand what role we play in creating the suffering in our lives and in the lives of those around us. The goal of Buddhism is to liberate us from suffering. The third noble truth tells us that when we look deeply into the causes of our suffering, we see that it is possible to transform our suffering. The fourth noble truth, the Eightfold Path, shows us a way to end suffering. Understanding the path is a lifelong practice. So at this point, we're going to part ways with Buddhist thought. Besides, most of us here, present here today, are more you than Buddhist. But before we part ways, we'll borrow a significant teaching on how to transform suffering. That teaching is the idea that in order to transform suffering, we need to see things as they are. As we see things the way they really are, we begin to identify illusions. We may see that we are living a lifestyle that is controlled by the idea of time. We do not live in the present moment because things will be different tomorrow. We torture ourselves with the past, or we live there in dreamy satisfaction. We may find that we are living with expectations that do not make sense. Hard work does not always lead to accomplishment. Kindness is not always reciprocated. We have illusions about the nature of power and find that we believe that we can change someone other than ourselves. The list of illusions we live can be quite long. Seeing things as they are frees us from our ignorance. As we grow in understanding of ourselves, we grow our understanding of others. In that, it is in that then that we begin to fill with loving kindness. My health issues have been like bicycle training wheels for the people in this congregation, and I'm happy to say that many members have used my health issues to practice that vehicle of loving kindness. That's a terrible simile. That's terrible. I have learned some things from my pain, but I've learned more from the kindness that has been shown to me. Let me give some examples. One thing I used to not like is people visiting me in the hospital. It embarrasses me to know that people are seeing me distracted by pain or loopy on meds. And why would anyone want to visit a hospital with IVs and beeping monitors and deserving a special UGG drainage tubes? But I'm changing my thoughts about visitors because of the visitors that have come to me from this congregation. I'm coming to realize that an understanding of suffering moves people to work to relieve the suffering of others. And I like that thought more than the thought that Bud Smith really likes hospitals. By the time I arrived home, there were cards waiting for me. These cards brought me great joy. They were concrete evidence that people wished me well. I have sometimes been reluctant to send cards because I felt that I could not find the right one. Well, thanks to Helene and Jim Gentile, I don't have to worry about that ever again. Helene and Jim sent me a card with a teddy bear staring out a window. Here is the message that they wrote. I'm quoting now. Tacky card. Not sure what a teddy bear looking out a window has to do with feeling better, but the sentiment is meant. I laughed when I read that card. And in fact, I still have that card. Buying and sending cards sends a clear message of caring. If you feel unsure as to how to show your loving kindness, try giving food or chocolate. For many of us, chocolate is a food that can ask suffering to go take a nap, and suffering does. Most people who do not think of themselves as great cooks or bakers still have their specialties that are worth sharing. There were a handful of people from this congregation who brought entire meals. This was not just nice for me, it was great for Barbara, who was doing all the cooking and cleaning. The meals were so wonderful that I stayed away from UUCSJS for an extra 2 weeks, hoping that people would think, we need to send the Millers more food. And keep in mind that the kindness of food is a kindness where you get to keep a little bit for yourself. I have had people bring me books before, but Jesse and Jack Connor brought me an entire basket of reading material. The selections were perfect for me and magically made many of my hours pass pain-free. I'm now reading additional works by the authors they introduced me to in that basket of readings. The Connors' kindness will radiate outwards as I share these authors with other people who I know will like them. The phone calls I received were also a blessing. They pleasantly broke up my homebound days and pulled me back into the world. They gave me a chance to express myself and in doing so, evaluate my healing. At the end of a call, I would realize, hey, I'm a little better than I was a few days ago. And even if I wasn't, faking it for a while made it seem so and surely progressed my healing. Although looking back at it, I suspect some of you might be thinking, faking it? All I heard was complaints. I thank all of you who listened. When I returned to this building after a few weeks, I was greeted with more loving support, and I hope no one was offended that I wasn't giving and receiving hugs at that time. I've named some names, but I've left out the great majority of names who showed loving kindness to Barbara and I. Please know that your acts of kindness are appreciated and that they're helping to make me a better person. Just as suffering is always with us, so are opportunities to show kindness. Do not create more suffering by worrying about what kind of act of kindness is best. Recognize, appreciate, and share your strengths, whether they're cooking, writing, listening, or some other gift you can share. And please don't punish yourself because you missed an opportunity to do something special for someone. More opportunities will come. You can be sure of that. A religious community like UUCSJS creates an environment for intimacy. As we come to know the people in our community, our investment in their well-being grows. And as we come to know the people in our community, we come to know not just their joys, but their sorrows. As we come to know their sorrows, we come to know our sorrows. As we come to know that we are supported, we also support. Knowing this is to show loving kindness.